Are you hurt? Let me take a look. Oh, you're here. I apologize. That must have made for uncomfortable viewing. Don't let your emotions get the better of you. If I were in his shoes, I might well have had the same reaction. Now I need to focus on treating the patients and dispelling their doubts. Let's leave it for now. I'll feel a lot better once I've gotten rid of this mess that Vash left us. Now's as good a time as any to tell you Vash's whole story. If there's anything you want to know, don't hesitate to ask. No, but I used to think we were so close that we may as well have been. I actually grew up in the orphanage. It wasn't until I was adopted by an overworld family that life changed for me. My adoptive mother always saw me as her own flesh and blood, and Vash loved me like a sister. That is, while we were still young. My adoptive parents belonged to a prominent medical family. As kids, we were exposed to all kinds of medical texts. When we were older, both of us got straight into Belobog's medical school. We were on a path into the medical profession. He was gentle and introverted. But when it came to work, he could be absurdly obsessive, like a completely different person. Whenever I made a mistake in an experiment, he'd bite my head off. And then a while later, he'd apologize and comfort me. He was conflicted in that way. I didn't know he had leftover reagents in Rivet Town. I was shocked when you told me. If you fail to make a clean break with the past creeps up on you. That's a long story. Ever since he was little, Vash had always wanted to develop a medicine called blizzard immunity. He saw the human body's vulnerability to cold as a disease, and wanted to cure it so that humanity could survive the eternal freeze. If he succeeded, people would be able to leave Belobog and rebuild their homes in the snow plains. To be honest, I never understood how he'd achieve that blizzard immunity. But I do admire that vision and perseverance. I always chose to believe him, ever since I was a kid. I knew his research in the overworld wasn't going well. I used to write to him and ask him to come down and stay with the kids in the orphanage for a while. I thought it might help take his mind off his research. But I was too young to know what long-term frustration could do to a person. It changed him in a terrible way. During his stay in the underworld, he met patients affected by fragmentum corrosion with mild symptoms. Compared with non-patients, their bodies reacted differently to hot and cold. And that fascinated Vash. He began to simulate mild fragmentum corrosion, thinking that it could lead to breakthroughs in developing blizzard immunity. Those reagents of his aren't cure-alls for critical illness. That doesn't exist. Vash made the reagents to mitigate the suffering of his patients in the short term. A convenient way for him to observe changes in his test subjects. But behind my back, he had been doling out the reagents to residents who were kept in the dark. When it finally struck me that something was wrong, his terrible research had already turned him into a madman. I trusted Vash with all my heart. Funny, isn't it? And pathetic. When his experiments were exposed, I spent a long time with Oleg discussing how to handle the aftermath. This was shortly before the underworld was sealed off. There were hardly any Silvermane guards remaining. We spent ages trying to find a way to handle Vash. In the end, Oleg suggested that we banish him and permanently deny him access to the underworld. Had his victims found out the truth, Vash would have been torn to pieces by furious underworlders. I was young and weak at the time. Oleg must have worried about how I'd react to such a scenario, or he wouldn't have suggested banishment. I hope so. The day I learned the truth was the day I no longer recognized my brother. Oleg and I took Vash to the overworld. He made his final request to us, to take him outside the city to the snow plains he'd always wanted to conquer. His figure gradually disappeared into the snow curtain. I've been telling myself that Vash is dead ever since. Forgive me. I'm not good at telling stories. Vash was a terrible brother and a worse doctor. That's all you need to know. Let's call it a day. Thank you for cleaning up the mess my brother left behind. Here, for your trouble.